as we're looking at end times, we're currently working our way through Revelation 20, the end of the story almost. And what we're seeing is that there is this physical return of Jesus, the second coming of Jesus, where he will then reign for 1,000 years. And we saw in our last session that one interpretation of this is what's called amillennialism, that the 1,000-year reign of Jesus is symbolic and that it's actually happening now in the church age. A second view is what's called postmillennialism, and this is the idea that Jesus will return after the millennium. In other words, that we're living in the church age now. That church age will become the millennium, and at the end of the millennium, Jesus will return. There'll be a rapture, resurrection of believers and unbelievers. There'll be the judgment, and then after that, going into the new heavens and the new earth and enjoying eternity. That is the summary, I suppose, of what's called postmillennialism. But on what beliefs does that have a basis? The argument for a post-millennial understanding of the millennium, the 1,000-year reign of Jesus, is that there is a progress of the gospel and a growth of the church that has been increasing significantly and will increase significantly. And as a result of this growth of the church and the growth of the Christian gospel, the preaching of the gospel to the ends of the earth, there'll be a greater Christian influence on society, and that greater Christian influence on society will begin to influence the world and lead to a millennial age of peace and righteousness on the earth. It would suggest that this is not necessarily a literal 1,000 years, again a bit like the amillennial view. And it also holds to the idea that the rapture and the resurrection, physical resurrection of bodies, happens at the same time. As you might expect, there are again some biblical basis for understanding this. And this begins with the Great Commission, and again a bit like the amillennial view, where Jesus said, "All authority on heaven and earth has been given to me. Go and make disciples." And it takes a view that if Jesus has given us this to fulfill, then it's something that Jesus will fulfill. It also points to some of the parables of Jesus about the gradual growth of the kingdom, and interprets things like Matthew 13, 31 to 32, where Jesus told the parable of a mustard seed, of a slow-growing small seed that grows out to become a big tree that the whole earth will take shelter in, and interprets that as a picture of the gradual growth of the church, and hence this growth from the church age into the millennium. So this view holds that the world is becoming more Christian, and that the church is growing despite the persecution that we see around the world. It clearly has an understanding of the millennial kingdom, and that looks very differently as to how we might read some of what we see when we literally read the Bible. And it interprets the millennial kingdom as not being a renewed earth and heaven, that the glorified saints of Jesus are not present in bodily form. As it works through this, the focus is not on the events that surround it, but what people would call the nature of it and how that is interpreted. I guess some of the problems that we might see with some of this is that the Great Commission, where Jesus said, "All authority has been given to me," it's not necessarily correct to interpret that as that will result in the majority of the world being converted. Jesus spoke very clearly that there is a narrow gate, Matthew 7 verses 13 to 14, and implied that few respond. In 2 Timothy 3 verses 1 to 5, we see that in the last days, those wanting to follow Jesus will be persecuted. And in Matthew 24, Jesus implies that the Great Tribulation precedes the return of Jesus. So, for those of us who would want to try to let the Bible speak plainly, we might have some struggles with this view. But nonetheless, it is a view that some hold, and based on biblical reasons.